Hello and welcome back to 1874. It's time for a transfer talk with a very French flavour to it. I am your host, Dan Bardell, and this show is sponsored by Match Bingo. Don't worry, you can just see and hear me right now, but I'm actually going to be joined by French football expert Jonathan Johnson to talk all things Boubacar Kamara, Marco Asensio and Lucas Chevalier. Great to have Jonathan on. I've already recorded it. I'll put my cards on the table. The show's already been recorded. It was really, really interesting. Brought up some things that I hadn't even considered in this show. So it's well worth listening to and watching. Jonathan Johnson, French football expert, talking to me now here on 1874. Looking forward to chewing the French football. It's not really French football, but chewing the French football fat with you. Also related to Villa, obviously, because we are an Aston Villa channel talking about Aston Villa today. We've got three players that I'm going to trouble Jonathan with talking about today. We've got Marco Asensio, Boubacar Kamara and Lucas Chevalier. We're going to talk about all three of those. This is a transfer talk with a very French flavour this week. So, Jonathan, we'll start with Marco Asensio. I would say I'm surprised. I was going to say I'm surprised that we haven't signed him yet because everything was pointing towards the back end of the season that Villa were going to take up the option to sign Marco Asensio for a reasonable fee. PSG quite keen to obviously let him go. But nothing's happened yet. Is there a reason for that, do you know?
I think there's a couple of reasons for it, and first of all, thanks a lot for having me back on. Always look forward to these appearances. I think there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, let's not forget that of the loanees from the winter transfer window, I think it was only Rashford where there was actually an option in place that was pre-agreed with a fixed price. And given sort of what's happened the last couple of weeks with PSG, I don't think necessarily that transfer dealings would have been the first priority. Obviously, there's been a lot of celebrations linked to the Champions League success, and let's not forget that PSG have jetted off to the US as well for the FIFA Club World Cup. So it's a tricky time to get into conversation. Certainly conversations involving Luis Enrique in order to discuss sort of potential needs in terms of next season. Now, I'm not saying that sort of Asensio will have overnight become more important to PSG. I think he's probably more on the periphery in Paris than he ever has been. I think there's a couple of other names that will probably join him in leaving PSG this summer as well, notably Gonzalo Ramos, who's also been linked with Villa and who I think would be an excellent pickup in an ideal world for the Villa. But it's a tricky one right now with Asensio, and I think he's probably in limbo a little bit because it's been very quiet on the Villa end. And obviously, like I said, PSG sort of have the commitment to be in the US for the Club World Cup for however long PSG remain in the competition for at least the group phase. You've got sort of an incomplete PSG squad that's gone over there for the moment. Asensio isn't part of that group. So it does suggest that, PSG will explore potentially finding him a suitable exit. And obviously Villa will be top of that list given his, I think we can call it a fruitful loan over the second half of the season, even if it did tail off a bit towards the end. And I do think that there will be some discussions that take place. But for me, the feeling, I think, is that we'll probably see more activity come July time as opposed to the final 2 weeks of June. Fingers crossed the business does ramp up as quickly as possible on the Villa end, because it does feel like it's been very, very quiet so far this summer. But I do think that Asensio will be one of the first conversations that is possibly had, and it's an easy one as well for PSG to potentially negotiate because as we saw last season, there's no real space for Asensio in Luis Enrique's PSG squad anymore.
It's pretty clear that he was happy at Villa and he enjoyed his time in the Premier League. He spoke of having always wanted to play in the Premier League as well, whilst he was on his loan spell with Villa. I think he's a player that, I'm not saying he's not Champions League class because he definitely is, but for a Europa League campaign, if you watch what Isco did in the Conference League, for example, a few weeks ago, he strikes me as a player that's perfect for a Europa League campaign for Villa. But then on the flip side of that, he's probably also a player that wants to operate at the highest level in the Champions League because that's what he's done throughout his career, having obviously played for Real Madrid and PSG. Do you think Villa not making the Champions League has had any bearing on this at all?
I don't know if it would necessarily have had any bearing in terms of the players' feelings. I think ultimately, when you become such a key player in such a short space of time, and have a manager that believes in you in the way that Unai Emery very clearly does and illustrated over that second half of the season, I think that will count a lot for somebody like Asensio. And let's not forget, Asensio is somebody who's known a lot of bench time during his spells with both PSG, but also Real Madrid as well. And, I don't think that he'll be in a rush to get back to that. And although obviously it's not ideal from a financial point of view, but also for players who want to be playing at the highest level every season, to be dropping down to the Europa League from the Champions League, you look at what Villa managed to achieve last season, especially the heroic fight back at home to PSG, and the fact that it went down to the final minutes of the final day of the season, ultimately for Villa to only just miss out on getting back into the Champions League. I do think that players like Asensio will see the value, in what has been created, the momentum that's been built up, and also the role that the club has played in terms of his turnaround. Now, obviously, there is an element of his future being out of his hands, and it's up to both Villa and PSG to agree to the right structure of deal. I think something else that is probably a bit underrated at the moment in terms of continuity and potentially this deal being made permanent is the fact that there hasn't been a change of sporting director at PSG. There was a lot of speculation that Luis Campos would go. I know he was linked strongly with Manchester United. Ultimately ended up staying on with PSG. And I think that is going to be very influential this summer, because obviously he was the one who agreed the deal to loan Asensio to Villa in the first place in winter. So as far as I can see, feelings won't have changed on the Paris end. So the question is now if Asensio feels happy with the way that the loan went, which he seems to, by all accounts, feel, then I do think that he is probably willing to make the step down into the Europa League, because when you look at it on paper, certainly given Villa's squad at this moment in time, Unai Emery's record in the competition, Villa will start as one of the favourites to make a very deep run and potentially go all the way. I know Emery has a reputation to live up to in the Europa League, and I think. Sure. Realistically, if you look at sort of the way that Villa performed, certainly in the knockout phase of the Champions League, it suggests that perhaps at a level down, which let's look at it as well on face value. There's a lot of very good teams that play in the Europa League. It's not it's not a huge step down, and I think the potential for Villa to win silverware. We've seen this season just gone, going very close in the FA Cup as well as to the latter stage of the Champions League. It does feel like Villa are a club getting very, very close now to potentially lifting a trophy after a long, long wait for the Villa fans. So I do feel like Asensio will look at that potential opportunity and possibly not be put off as much as many people would assume by the drop down to the Europa League.
Yeah, I think now the dust has settled, I think we can start to get a little bit excited about the Europa League. And I think the experience that the squad's gained from actually having played in the other two competitions, playing in the Conference League, playing in the Champions League, I actually now think being in the in-between, like European iteration, could end up being a good thing for Villa next season, and it's a real chance of silverware in the success that we all crave. Just lastly, on Asensio then, the Jonathan Johnson gut feeling, does this get done?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suspect that there will be a big effort on both sides to make sure that the deal gets done, and I hope as well an effort on the players' side. The only thing that I find myself getting a little wary about at the moment is where Asensio potentially figures in the shake-up for priority recruits, depending on who leaves Villa. And I think that's the big question at this moment in time, and probably explains why we haven't really seen any activity from Villa so far. Okay, I mean, there's been very few Premier League clubs as busy as, say, Manchester City. You had to get a load of deals done before the Club World Cup. But it does feel like there is a period of deliberation going on at Villa Park in terms of working out exactly who could potentially be sacrificed. I know there's no Villa fans who are really sort of wanting to see a star name kind of sacrifice for the greater good, but it does feel like whoever Villa ultimately decide to potentially cash in on, that will dictate sort of how high up the list of priorities that Asensio is. So at this moment in time, I don't know if I would be willing to say that I have, a conviction in my gut that the Villa are ultimately going to do the deal for Asensio. Like I said earlier as well, I think that the second half of his loan spell was obviously a lot less prolific than the first half of it. Maybe that will factor into Villa's thinking a little bit as well. But I am optimistic that we'll see Asensio again in a Villa shirt. So let's see what form that takes, because I wouldn't rule out potentially an extension of the loan, but this time with perhaps an obligation to buy at the end of it or something like that.
Okay, I put that at a 6 or 7 out of 10 from the Jonathan Johnson likelihood there from what you've said. Let's move on. You've just spoken about players being sacrificed. I take no joy in talking about this every single week on the channel at the moment, and in the other work that I do, unfortunately, is the nature of where Villa are at. Boubacar Kamara, there has been loose links to PSG, obviously a Jonathan Johnson flavour to that as well, with you being a Villa fan and a PSG fan. I mean, I said yesterday on the show, he's a fantastic player, but good luck getting into that PSG midfield because it functions very, very well. Is there anything in Boubacar Kamara to PSG, firstly? It strikes me as a bit of a lazy link, unless you're going to tell me otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you there. I mean, he has been linked with PSG in the past, but sort of making the direct move from Marseille was always going to be tricky. I think it is logical, obviously, with PSG's newfound status as not only French champions, but champions of Europe now as well, that a number of those talented French players performing well abroad will be linked with a move back to Ligue 1 with PSG. But for me, like you, I don't see the immediate logic in it. I think the priority for PSG will be to streamline Luis Enrique's squad a little bit, because there's a number of big names, especially in attack, that sort of PSG have to find solutions for. We've already spoken about Asensio, but you've also got Kolo Muani. You've also got Gonzalo Ramos, who I mentioned briefly as well. So that's three sort of pressing, cases to consider for PSG before potentially making moves themselves. And I think given the way that the midfield functioned so well this past season, the fact that you've got such depth as well, because you've got Zaire Emery, who's sort of struggling to break into the regular starting 11 at this moment in time. For me, I struggle to see PSG going all out, especially to pay the sort of money that Villa would need to be offered in order to part company with Boubacar Kamara. So for me, it's a tricky one to see. And honestly, on the topic of Bouba, it's hard to really see the move away from Villa that really ticks the boxes for him, with the exception of potentially going to a Champions League team in the Premier League. There's no sort of obvious destination there. I know that there's been links with Saudi and stuff like that, but that's still going to take him out of Champions League contention for another season. And I completely appreciate the situation for Bouba. He's trying to make up for lost time given the injuries that he's had that have kept him out for a while. Trying to make the most of the momentum built up from last season when he was absolutely superb, and the fact that he's still kind of on the edge of potentially a starting place for the French national team, which I do think is still going to be in transition, even in a year's time when they go to the World Cup, because it'll be coming towards the end of the Didier Deschamps era and presumably the start of the Zinedine Zidane one. So I do wonder about the logic of pushing for a move right now, because if Kamara makes the wrong move, not only might he be depriving himself of Champions League football for longer than a season, he might end up playing himself out of contention for the 2026 World Cup with France as well. So it is, it is a very sensitive topic, and one that I know that sort of sends dread through all Villa fans whenever the topic of his future comes up at the moment, and hopefully the contract extension offer that the club have put in front of him, which I hope is still valid and on the table, ultimately turns out to be the option that he goes for.
I think you've hit some really important points there. I'd not really considered that actually there isn't a logical move for him out there. I can't see where he would go. Obviously, you've touched on the Saudi links there, but that's going to be no good for his career. He won't want to go there. So actually, I'd not factored in that there isn't really a logical next step for him if he does want to play Champions League football this season. If you're saying PSG isn't really on the table, then there isn't really anywhere for him to go, which is a good thing for Villa. I did a show yesterday and we kind of looked at maybe, if Martinez doesn't go, he is the most likely. But actually, you've completely made me rethink what I said yesterday with what you just said there.
Something else as well, I guess, that kind of factors into it, the obvious destination in the Premier League outside of clubs that will play in the Champions League next year would be City. And if you gave Villa fans the choice between potentially losing Nipan to City or losing Buba to City, I think all Villa fans would go with keeping Buba as opposed to to bringing in Nipan, and that looks at this moment in time like it's the most likely scenario. Obviously, City, given their financial strength, you can't rule out them looking to potentially add more players to that position, but that kind of closes perhaps the most obvious door in terms of a best fit with another Premier League club playing in the Champions League next season.
I think it's really interesting. I think if I take away my obvious Villa bias, for Kamara, probably your best bet is to sit for another year, do 12 months, do another season, perform well, try and have an injury-free season because he has missed a big kind of chunk of each season he's had at Villa with injury. Do that. You've then got 12 months left on your contract. I mean, this wouldn't be good for Villa, I guess. You've got 12 months left on your contract. You've maybe got the option that your price is going to come down a bit, or you see out your final year and you go on a free, like you did to Marseille. You don't take risks the year before a World Cup, and he knows what he's going to get at Villa. He knows he's going to play every week and still be playing at a high level. So I actually think that the people around Kamara would do well to probably tell him that, even though I'd rather he signed a 5-year contract and obviously stayed at Villa. I think what I've just said is actually the most sensible scenario for him. So having you on has completely changed my mind with what I was talking about with Max Stokes yesterday. So that's good. It's always good to get different voices and different opinions. Let's focus on our final player then. And it's a difficult one to focus on because, again, everything feels in flux at the moment. We don't know who's going to be leaving. So I'm just going to put it simply. If Emi Martinez was to leave Villa before June the 30th or after June the 30th, would Lucas Chevalier be an adequate replacement?
Absolutely, he'd be top of my list of potential replacements.
Really?
I've said as much in sort of Villa chats on WhatsApp with friends and family as well. I've absolutely no doubt that Lucas Chevalier is not only potentially a starting goalkeeper in the future for a Champions League club season after season. I would probably pick him as the strongest current prospect to be a long-term number one for the French national team as well. And I think the timing is really, really interesting and potentially crucial as well to his future, because I think over the next 12 months, he definitely has the potential, especially when you look at the way that Maignan has kind of dropped off recently, to possibly play himself into a starting position for the World Cup. And similar to the debate that we've just been having on Buba as well, it's, the World Cup, assuming that they both go and are both part of Didier Deschamps' squad, they both have the potential to be real breakout stars at that tournament. And, if we're sort of debating the value of either, in Buba's case, tying him down now, or in Chevalier's case, sort of talking about going for him now, their potential value, although it's fairly high already, has the potential to be much, much higher exponentially. So, should they have a strong World Cup and then trying to do a deal off of the back of that, I think as well, when you're looking at sort of the moving parts to a potential deal for Chevalier, there's no better time to be shopping in France and Ligue 1 right now, given the sort of extended lack of certainty regarding the TV rights situation and the financial strain that puts on so many of the clubs. You look at the fact that Lille have already lost a couple of star names on free transfers or without, receiving a transfer fee for them, Jonathan David, Angel Gomez. It's going to be a really, really tricky time for Lille in order to potentially retool. and give Bruno Genesio the kind of squad that he needs to remain competitive. And that might require, similar to the discussion that we've been having about Villa, a sacrifice to be made. And Chevalier, although it's not easy at all to find a goalkeeper of similar quality to come and replace him, he is perhaps their most saleable asset at this moment in time. And we know that Lille ultimately, are a selling club, and they have to function that way, especially at this moment in time, given the nature of how things are in French football right now. So, if Martinez, you're offering me the scenario, if Martinez leaves before the end of the month, absolutely, I wouldn't hesitate to go for Chevalier.
You just spoke about how much you don't want to lose Kamara. Would you actually take that scenario? Let's say we have to sell someone. It's going to be someone that none of us want to lose. Would you take that? Would you believe that Chevalier has what it takes, has the minerals to take over from such a big character and a big goalkeeper?
In terms of his performance, yes. And I think in terms of the leadership loss in the dressing room, it would be a tough blow. But there's no sort of easy blow, for Villa to potentially take on the transfer front. A sacrifice ultimately is going to hurt wherever it comes. I do think that there are certain positions where we're maybe a little better stocked in terms of making a sacrifice. But, if we're talking about, say, left back and Luca Dean's future, I only really see that benefiting Villa potentially in terms of the wage bill, as opposed to potentially bringing in a fee. I think the thing to factor in with Martinez, and obviously like all other Villa fans, I'm a huge fan of him, and sort of what he's managed to achieve over the years with Villa, and the status that he has, not only at club level but international level as well. But you also have to factor in the player's age, salary, and the opportunities that Villa might or might not have in the future to cash in on him again. And if there is the possibility to earn a significant payday and, ultimately retool from July onwards and bring in a player of Chevalier's, not only current ability, but potential as well, then I think that's something that really has to be seriously considered. And also, I think when you look at the situation with the goalkeepers, with Olsen leaving as well, if Emi Martinez was to leave, you're essentially rebuilding the entire goalkeeping position hierarchy, not just one player in the starting 11. So, for me, I do see the logic in ultimately having to sacrifice Emi Martinez if it comes to that. But also, like many other Villa fans, it's not something that I would do lightly. It's it's tough. It's going to be emotional, as we saw in the final 2 games of the season. But like I said, there's no easy situation for Villa in terms of considering who to potentially sacrifice. So yeah, it's a tricky one. But ultimately, if you said to me that the trade-off would be lose Martinez but bring in somebody like Chevalier, then I would probably sign for that, if I'm being, sort of hand on heart right now. The only thing that I would say on that is I struggle to see a world in which Chevalier costs less than Martinez at this moment in time. Sure, in terms of, the ultimate impact of a transfer fee and the wages coming off of the books, it would be substantial. But Chevalier is not going to come cheap. He's, like I said, he's probably the most saleable asset that Lille have right now. And many, many top European clubs, have him on their radar as well.
I guess just thinking about what you've just said on the fly, that you lose Martinez before June the 30th for a fee, and then you pick Chevalier up kind of past June the 30th, and he's on less wages. I guess that works. What kind of fee do you think Chevalier would command?
I mean, I have difficulty. I mean, it also depends on the timing, with Lille as well, having to go in front of the DNCG. It's a really, really rocky period for French clubs who have been told to budget for the moment without any potential TV rights money. If suddenly there's a glimmer of hope in terms of TV rights money coming in, that completely changes their negotiation situation. So I think really it's a deal that has to be lined up before the end of June, probably lined up before, Martinez, in theory, in this discussion that we're having, would be sort of on the verge of completing a move away, and then sort of ready to pull the trigger at the beginning of July. But like I said, there's a lot of stuff that could change in the next couple of weeks and is expected to change, certainly, on the French side of things. So basically the time to strike a deal and to strike a deal in the most favorable terms possible is now. And if that's not being done, and I know that there's been hints in recent weeks that that Chevalier is one of Villa's top targets, you would hope that something has potentially been lined up as one of the potential scenarios for Villa to sort of make sense of things financially in the next couple of weeks, that's something that's already fairly far along. Because if it isn't, like I said, I think suddenly the price could shoot up depending on what happens, notably in terms of the French TV rights, which at this moment in time, on top of losing 2 star players for no transfer fee, Lille are budgeting with no TV money as well. So that, I think, potentially makes it the right time, to really push hard for somebody who is a massive, massive talent.
We spoke about Kamara and kind of transfer routes that he might have not been fruitful, not been plentiful. Chevalier, other than Villa, where would you see him going? What kind of team would you think would be lining him up if not Villa?
I mean, that's a good question, because a number of sort of the obvious destinations are kind of taken at the moment. I think we were also linked with Garcia from Espanyol.
Yeah, I did a show on him,
before Chevalier's name came up, and it seems like he's closer to Barcelona. So I think that would have been sort of the obvious kind of destination. And also, Barca, might have been a potential destination for Martinez before sort of that transfer situation seemed to crystallize in terms of, ultimately Garcia crossing the divide from Espanyol to Barca. So it is a tricky one to potentially map out. I think they're very rare top quality goalkeepers on the transfer market. I think the only other major big name goalkeeper move that seems to be in the offing at this moment in time is Maignan potentially going to Chelsea, and Milan looking for a backup. The other possibility, and I say it's a possibility because it's not sort of set in stone at this moment in time, and it wouldn't be music to Villa fans' ears, is if Donnarumma leaves PSG, or PSG make him available, and I don't know whether he go to Saudi, whether he go back to Italy, whether there might be a Premier League club that comes in for him. But if he was to leave, given the way that the PSG project has been heading, and the sort of newfound focus on French talent, Chevalier would suddenly probably jump up in terms of being a priority for PSG in terms of getting a deal done.
Yeah, the other one thing that struck me has been a possibility, and I'm surprised about this. Maignan and Chelsea doesn't feel like the right fit to me, and it doesn't fit in with their transfer strategy generally over the last few years. I was surprised that they're not going for kind of a younger French goalkeeper in Chevalier. That was something that surprised me. But as ever with the transfer window, I'm sure there'll be different stories coming out all the time. Every day we'll see something there. There's going to be plenty happening, plenty of twists and turns. Just finally, of the 3 things that we've discussed, again, I'm asking for a Jonathan Johnson gut feeling here. Which one's the most likely? Chevalier to Villa, Kamara to leave, or Asensio to Villa? If you had to pick one that you think is the most likely of those 3, which one would you pick?
I'm going to go with my gut instinct, and that is still that Martinez ultimately leaves, even if we're sort of hearing conflicting kind of reports on that at this moment in time. So I'm gonna stick to my gut feeling there and say that that's probably the thing that makes the most sense. So ultimately, whether it's Chevalier, whether it's another goalkeeper, it does still feel like that's maybe the most likely scenario that we're heading towards at this moment in time.
That's really big. I honestly thought you were going to go safe and just say Asensio. So fair play to you for not going safe and going for the last one. So Jonathan, always a pleasure to talk to you. Love having you on the channel. Thank you ever so much for coming and speaking to me today on this transfer show.
No, thanks a lot for having me on. Always a pleasure. And hopefully we catch up again in a couple of weeks' time with a bit more positive and upbeat news for Villa fans, given how quiet it's been so far.
Thank you to Jonathan for coming on. That was so interesting. I really got to think about some things that I hadn't considered. Jonathan's always good value, really, really respected journalist and knows everything about French football, and of course a big Villa fan as well. So always great to have him on the channel. If you have enjoyed this show and you've been watching via YouTube, then give this video a like and leave a comment as well with your thoughts on what Jonathan and I spoke about today. Amazing how many people aren't subscribed. I keep saying it, but if you're watching this and you're not subscribed with your post notifications on, please, if you can do anything for me today, if you're enjoying the content, please subscribe with your post notifications on YouTube. I'm really loving doing all this extra content, all the stuff we've got going on at the moment, trying to keep it as daily as I can, as much as my schedule allows. And if you aren't sick of me, and if you are watching or listening to this on Thursday, the 12th of June, I'm actually co-hosting on TalkSport tonight for Transfer Insiders, 7 p.m. till 10 p.m. Hugh Wozencroft and myself. If you're not bored of me, then please listen. That would mean a lot to me as well. You can watch TalkSport now on the LG TVs, I think, on Amazon. You can watch it on other than YouTube. You can watch it everywhere, basically, TalkSport now as well. So if you want to support me, I'd really, really appreciate you tuning into TalkSport tonight at 7 p.m. till 10 p.m. Thank you ever so much. Thank you for all the support you give me. Thank you for all the nice things you say on social media as well. And even thank you to those that don't say nice things, because it's all engagement. Only one thing left to say, as ever, up the Villa.